welcome once again to Let's Talk Marriage. This is Pastor Larry coming to you this Wednesday afternoon with Let's Talk Marriage. All right. We're going to get right on into our program on today. Hope everyone is doing well. If you woke up this morning, you are doing well. All right. We're going to get right on into our program. What we're going to be talking about today is we've covered it before on the program, but we feel like it's much needed, and you can never get enough of listening to your spouse or listening to. Let's just put it this way: listening to each other. Okay, we're going to be talking about that on today. Again, hope everybody is enjoying the wonderful weather we're having out here in Illinois. We got past the winter months. We're now in the month of March. Spring is coming, and everybody is going to be feeling the warmth of this weather. Okay, let's get right on into our program. We're going to be talking about listening again. We're talking about listening because it's very important in any relationship, in anything in life. There's listening is involved, and when you're listening, you can't very well talk at the same time that you're listening. When you're listening, you have to be quiet. And a lot of times our wives be telling us stuff, and we as men, we sometimes we don't listen, and it causes so many problems. It causes problems, and it affects. And I had a message that what you do affect others, and when we don't listen as men to our wives, it causes a chain reaction. Other things start to go wrong, and you start to get frustrated. But we should feel like we can talk to each other as a married couple, pretty much about everything, or pretty near everything. We should be able to talk to with our spouse, but a lot of times we can't do that because we're not listening. And sometimes sometimes I admit I'm a really bad listener, but for the most part I try. But no one is a perfect listener. But that's why listening takes practice. So we have to practice becoming a perfect listener. And I myself, I'm not a perfect listener, but I've made an effort, especially this year, to make sure I listen. Because you can miss so much when you don't listen. Yeah. Even in school, if you don't listen to the instructions that are given by the teacher, professor, or what have you, you will miss out a lot. And when we didn't listen to our parents as children, we missed out on a lot, and it affected other members of our family. That's why we have to learn how to listen. And just because you have a concern does not mean it's a complaint. A lot of times it's just what it is, a concern. And a lot of times we have, some concerns in our marriage, so we want to talk to it with our spouse, which is nothing wrong with that. We should be able to listen to them. And that's the same thing when you go to church. You should be able to listen to what the minister has to say. Because if he's speaking, you can't talk at the same time. You can't talk and listen at the same time. When you're listening, that's when you're not saying anything at all. And sometimes when people are voicing their concerns or something, for some odd reason, sometimes we might feel like it's personal, feel like it's they're trying to offend us, or we get on the defense, and then we have to open our mouth and say something. But it should not be like that when we're listening. That's why it takes a person to listen, to receive things. The Bible said he that has an ear to let him hear what the word has to say. When you're hearing something, you're listening to it. And we're not good listeners as human beings. We don't listen to what's going on in the world. Sometimes our doctors don't listen to us. And certainly our kids are real have a real bad habit of not listening. I remember my mother saying to me many times, "Did you hear what I said?" And you go ahead and say, "Yeah, yeah, I heard you," but you're not really listening. And a lot of times the same thing with our teachers, when they're talking to us. If it's something that we don't want to hear about, we don't listen to it. But sometimes, just because you don't want to hear it does not mean it should not be said or heard. So we have to learn how to be gracious listeners. That's the word I want to. Gracious listeners, because sometimes when we ask someone to, oh, just tell me what's on your mind, and then when they tell you what's on your mind, you get offended, you take it personal. But that's not the case. Sometimes when people say they have something on their mind, it's just simply what it means, just something on their mind. And a lot of times it's uh, or most of the times it's there to help us as men. And we are alpha person people, and we don't like to be listening to something. We want to always feel like we're in control of something. But listening is far ways out all the conversations you can say. And sometimes when people are talking or discussing something or have some concerns, most of the time they're just venting. It's nothing personal. They're not trying to bring you down or put you down or anything like that. They're just venting. And sometimes people need to vent. And I was trained, as a psychiatrist to learn to listen, and the courses that I took. That was one of the major thing was listening. And we as human beings, we want to be heard, but we don't want to listen. And a lot of times when you want to be heard, it's something you don't need to be said. Does not need to be said. And we've said on the program many times too about people always saying, "Oh, I'm gonna tell you the truth." Sometimes you have to pick and choose your battles. Sometimes the truth is not worth it because you cause all other kinds of conflicts, and you don't want to always be in a conflict with your spouse. And that's when we were talking about dating on the program a couple weeks ago. We were talking about dating, and I had mentioned that the churches that I went to as coming up as a teenager and as a preteen, they taught us about how to listen to each other. I've been trained on listening for a while. So, and then even on some of the jobs that I was at, they talked about how to listen. But when I was a teenager, we were talking about listening to each other. And sometimes we have to learn to listen. And when we're our youngsters are talking about going seeing someone and being on a date, you have to learn to listen to what that person is saying and how they're feeling. That way you won't misunderstand what they're saying. And some people are so misunderstood because the person wasn't listening to them. You can go in the wrong directions if you don't listen to the right directions. You can go in the wrong direction. And a lot of people, that's why they're going in the wrong direction, because they did not listen to the directions. And listening is so very, very important. I can't stress that enough, how important listening is. Some of the things that is covered under listening is accepting. Sometimes we don't want to accept what's being said. That's why we don't listen to it. We don't want to accept it. Attending is one of the things. Concentrating on what's being heard. Hearkening, and you hear that word a lot in the Bible. Hearkening, which means listen. Another word for listening. Heeding. Sometimes you hear that word being said. Heeding, which means listening. Receiving. So, see, when you listen, you're able to receive what's being said. If you're not listening, if you're talking at the same time, the person is trying to communicate with you, you're not receiving. And that's another part of listening is communication. And a lot of times we don't have good communicating skills. Communicating skills is a practice. No one is a perfect communicator, but you practice to become a perfect communicator. Sometimes you might miss something if you're trying to communicate it, especially if you feel like the person is not listening to you. Sometimes you'll miss what you were saying. Sometimes you might forget what you were about to say. But if you have someone's undivided attention where they're listening to it, there's a set attending, is mentioned in that. Paying attention is one of the things. And, attentive. If you're very attentive when someone is speaking, you can receive as well as them. And that's all part of listening in a marriage. When your spouse is saying something, listen to her. Sometimes our spouses might say that they're in pain, or they might say that they're hurting. And, sometimes we say, oh, they're always in pain. They're always sick. Sometimes you have to listen to what people are saying, because people's lives have been saved because people heard what they said. They might end up in an emergency room or something, and they'll remember that they would always complain about a headache or things like that. So that's why you have to listen. And we have doctors that are bad, horrible listeners. And you're telling them what's going on. They want to tell you, but if we listen, we can be diagnosed better. That's why you have to have a doctor that listen. And the same thing in a marriage. If you have a spouse that's listened, things can be diagnosed better. And there's a healing process, because if you heard what was needed, what needs to happen. So we have to understand, and that's a better understanding when or you get a better understanding when we listen. And a lot of times our spouses be trying to tell us something, or even sometimes the husbands are trying to tell you something, and you're not listening. We try to tell our kids something, they're not listening. Sometimes our kids are trying to tell us something, and we're not listening to them. And it causes a chain reaction, or your actions affect other people. That was one of the points that I brought out in that message that I had, that our actions affect other people. That's why it's very important that we learn to listen. And one of the major parts of communicating is listening. Because if you're communicating, you listen to what's being said, and you wait till that person finishes, and then you begin to communicate with them. And while you're communicating, they should be listening to you, not both talking at the same time. Because when you do that, then you start going into conflicts, and folks start yelling, and you said, and then they start bringing up stuff that happened. That's what happened last time. And then you go tit for tat. And that's where you don't want to go in a marriage. You want to make sure that we are listening to each other. And one of the major parts of listening to each other is respecting each other as well, because you learn to respect each other as well when you are listening. And right now we're going to be signing off, and we're talking about listening. We were talking about listening today. So make sure we are paying attention. This is Pastor Larry. Until we meet again on Let's Talk Marriage. I want to take the opportunity right now to invite you out to our services at New Zion Christian Center. We're located at 15014 South Desplaines Street in Plainfield, Illinois. Until we meet again, this is Pastor Larry signing off with Let's Talk Marriage.